Welcome to the chair. I'm your host, Dr. Digby James Wren. Today is Friday, March the 27th, and today we're going to, I didn't podcast yesterday because, I did half of a recording and it just got lost and for some reason, so circumstances took over and we just had to wait for 24 hours, that's all. So today we're going to go back and just cover everything. There's been quite a few changes since yesterday, so I suppose it's timely. And this podcast is not really about daily news and events. It's much more analysis and trying to give, let's say a predictive analysis in the sense of where is this going, where are we going to end up, and just how bad is it really going to be. And when I say that, specifically I'm talking about the latest news, which is Donald Trump has said that this 5-day ceasefire, that the Americans are not going to bomb civil infrastructure and power plants for 5 days, has now been extended to 10 days after there was very heavy sell-off in Wall Street yesterday. And I think Trump is very, very sensitive to the movements in the markets. And he's right to be like that. And I remember from my studies about Susan Strange mentioning in the 1990s that markets had overtaken governments. And I think this is a perfect example here in the American effort to overtake the oil markets, the global oil markets, because that's the first the first secondary effect, if you like, because the first effect clearly here is to subvert Iran. But the second effect, of course, is to take control of global oil and gas supplies, and then to be able to guarantee Israel's, let's call it primacy, regional primacy, because actually, although I've been saying in the past that it's a regional hegemon, I don't think Israel can ever be truly a regional hegemon. The population is just too small. So it can have power projection, but at the end of the day, it's really a small country, a very small country, both geographically, physically, and population-wise. And without the support of the United States, the unrestricted, unconstrained support of the United States, Israel would not be able to do what it is doing. And it has to be considered a direct proxy, I think, at this point in time. But what I am saying, and what I've repeated in all of my podcasts over the last week, is that the US is basically seeking to establish Iran's primacy in the region. That guarantees all the trade routes, Eastern Mediterranean, Suez, Red Sea, mouth to the Indian Ocean, and then up, through Jordan, Lebanon, Jordan, Syria, Iraq, all the way to Iran, of course. And that, of course, is making all its neighbours very nervous. Specifically, I think that the Saudis must be the most concerned. But the Egyptians are very worried, and the Turks are also very worried. It's destabilising. And it's not only destabilising the whole region, it's destabilising the globe and destabilising the global economy. So what else are we going to talk about today? I think what we'll go to is we'll do a kind of a quick assessment of the military situation. We'll look at China and the US relations, because going forward that's going to be very important. We look at the effects on Southeast Asia, where I'm based in Phnom Penh. Normally I travel quite a lot, but trying to get a plane to go somewhere is 3 times more expensive, and I don't want to fly over Western Asia by any means, and so it's clearly not a time to travel if you don't have to. I think local regional travel is still fairly okay, but prices have definitely gone up and there's less flights. I think that's going to be true. So we'll cover that. And then we'll also, have a look at just how far the destruction has been and the constraints on the economies of West Asia now. And it looks like they're basically losing 10 to 15 years of growth. Or maybe not growth, but rebuilding their infrastructure to get back to where they were. That's going to take a long time. Although one of my colleagues suggested that if China was to collaborate profoundly with Iran in reconstruction and rebuilding. It could be done a lot faster than the other countries, but my feeling, of course, is that the Chinese will be happy to build the whole region and to extend their influence, Belt and Road, trade, etc. And I think that's probably the biggest change here, is that the fact that Iran is being able to withstand and resist and provide deterrence to the American onslaught and the Israeli onslaught. In all of the narratives in the media, and I am listening, watching, reading every day, hundreds of sources. It is clear that the narratives in Western press are still sort of leading with the idea that Iran is attacking and Iran is doing that and Iran has done this terrorism acts or dangerous missile attacks, killing people. But very rarely did they start their stories with the fact that it was the Americans and the Israelis who unleashed this war, this act of aggression, that they used duplicity in terms of their negotiations to cover this fact, and that includes also at Qatar last year when they killed the negotiation team members in Qatar. So let's get into it and have a look at that. Now, is this all beneficial for the US, for the markets? Clearly not. Donald Trump has now given 10 days. Okay. Now, at the same time, also breaking, and I think that is very early this morning, breaking that Trump has announced that he's going to be going to China in May, and I think it's on the 14th and 15th of May. Just check that if I can. And I just check those dates quickly while I'm talking to you. The original date was going to be in April, but yeah, it's definitely, I think it's the 14th of May. So, and the Chinese have said that this points to the idea that the United States is going to have a kind of a resolution of some description in this conflict. At least they're hoping to have that. And clearly the Chinese want this to happen. And I think it really begins to indicate to us the fact that China now is the most stable economy. And the way to look at that is the fact that while bonds and treasuries in the United States, the yields have been rising and there's destabilization in that market, there's been sell-offs by allies and partners alike and others. Japan is in a very, very tight situation and may have to sell more treasuries to prop up the yen. The Chinese bonds have remained completely stable. There's almost zero volatility, which is a very good thing. And then the same is true for the currency, the yuan, which brings me to Iran saying that all oil that's paid for in yuan, the ships can go through Hormuz. And I just saw that South Korea has been allowed to go through now without problem. South Korea, which, it's a very big problem because the Americans have put South Korea in a terrible situation between China and, and a very aggressive United States. So they need that oil. And Japan also indicated that it would be willing to do so. And I haven't seen a confirmation of that they've actually done so. So I'm not sure at this point. Maybe one of the listeners can give me some feedback on that. So that means we are looking at an acceleration of de-dollarization and the possibility of a petro yuan. I think this is happening in real time. There's already arrangements between many countries in China for payments in yuan, for other minerals, iron ore and copper and so forth and so on, but specifically in oil, the Saudis signed a deal. I think the credit swap arrangements, UAE also, these credit swaps are very large, something like 50 billion, something like that. So the Saudis have plenty of yuan, and so if they have to sell their oil in yuan, fine. But I think what we're seeing here is an acceleration of the petro-yuan. It doesn't mean that the petrodollar is gone. It doesn't mean that. But it does mean that it's going to be declining, continue declining, and possibly quite rapidly. And I do remember that the former head of the People's Bank of China, about 4 or 5 years ago, made a speech, I think at the Central Bankers Conference or something like that, where he stated that the effect would be that it would start slowly, but then when it did actually happen, it would be very quick. And when I say quick, that could be 6 months to a year, 2 years, 3 years. And in terms of this kind of activity in markets and currency and exchanges, that is fast. So it seems to be happening right now. And I think the Americans have got to be very worried about that. And there's real possibility of capital flight out of the United States because of this. And where is all this money going to go? Well, if it's in yuan, for a start, and also if it's in other Asian currencies, where are people going to put their money? And the answer is they're going to go to the most stable economy, which is China. And the yuan is being used, as I just said, a possibility of a petro-yuan. So I think East Asia generally, and I think this has been true for quite a while actually, that there's capital flight from the US and Europe, and that capital has got to find somewhere to go, and the most stable place in the world is China. So it's been hovering around China in East Asia, if you like, and also in Southeast Asia, so it's Singapore, Hong Kong, Malaysia, South Korea, Japan. A lot of money's been going there and floating, and we saw that earlier this year when when the Japanese yen started to rise rapidly. Even Taiwan's currency rose rapidly. So there's a lot of money floating around East Asia, waiting for somewhere to go. Now, if it gets any worse, there's a distinct possibility that it's going to go into Hong Kong and start flowing into China because it's stable, guaranteed returns, secure. I mean, in real terms, the exact kind of opposite of what the US market is going to provide. And there, at the US market, and the fact that Trump has had to give this extra delay. Now, he's done that to settle the markets, but it also allows Israel and the US to, and as I've said in my previous podcast, it's allowed them to restock, make new orders for weapons and missiles. I saw that there was an order put through yesterday for many billions of dollars worth of missiles and interceptors. I saw another article about the opening of a factory in Ohio that's producing high-end drones, and I mean, large drones, and that they'd got that up very quickly, and that's gone into production. Also, small drones production. I think the US is now producing in large quantities. So this is one of the short-term effects, actually, to wind up the military-industrial supply chains. That seems to be what everybody's doing, really, isn't it? I mean, the minute you start spending money on weapons in this way, they're non-productive assets. So while the money goes into the economy, and and if you're producing dollars, if you're in America and you can print dollars to buy weapons that are made in America, it's slightly inflationary, of course, but at the same time, because all of the production is internal, you can pretty well just pay for it in dollars without any problems, and so that you can print whatever you require to do that. And basically that's what the G7 are doing, and the NATO countries have been doing. But you can see now that they're beginning to understand that with two major wars running, this is not going to help them out. Now, all of that to say that the US is ramping up their production of weapons, supply of weapons, the industrial manufacture, etc. And any more delays in Iran, the aggression on Iran, is going to give them more time. So, for example, the helicopter carrier USS Tripoli was in Singapore yesterday. So that's going to take another week to get to the Middle East, and other troop movements. So apparently now the totality is something like 10,000 US troops of all kinds heading into the Middle East. Apparently they're going to be at a central Saudi base, at least some of them are. why exactly that is, we'll discuss a little bit later in the podcast. But look, it's the play for time. But I think the Americans are really running out of time. So they've now set another agenda in terms of the visit of Trump to China. I'm pretty sure he cannot make that trip and cut any kind of a deal with China unless he first calls quits on Iran. Now that's going to be very, very difficult because the Iranians have now just come back with their own 15-point plan, but they don't say it's a plan. They called it just ideas, suggestions for negotiation, and it included, of course, Israeli withdrawal from Hezbollah, no more attacks. Same with Gaza. I suppose that includes the Houthis in Yemen as well, and anywhere else that U.S. aggression, Israeli aggression is proceeding. It also means that they will not, under any circumstances, negotiate over the use of their own ballistic missiles. But they are, of course, and this is one of the very, very important things that was negotiated by the Omanis prior to Israel and U.S. attacks, and that was that they would do what's called downblending or blending of the fissile of the enriched uranium to reduce it to just the quality sufficient for civil nuclear power production and nowhere near a weapons grade uranium. Now that is a very good offer, and apparently I listened to a discussion about that, saying, and from Jake Sullivan. I think that was an interview with Jake Sullivan, the former national security advisor for Joseph Biden, who mentioned that he thought that the Americans, and what he had been told by his colleagues and friends, was that the Americans had not understood properly what was on the table, and that they had rejected without really giving it enough thought. And every time I see Pete Hegseth making a speech of any kind, I begin to believe that he really is like a bull with a red flag, and logic and rationality has just disappeared from any discourse that he makes. And now he's also been set up by Trump in a public statement a couple of days ago where he said, and he turned to Pete Hegseth and said, Pete, I think it was you that first suggested going to Iran. And now that is just throwing Pete Hegseth into the line of fire, off with his head when this all goes south. Now, there is no benefit in the US for this, to keep this going. This is going to get worse and worse. Keeping oil under $100 a barrel, that's got to be one of their objectives. It's going to be very hard to achieve that while this goes on in the Straits of Hormuz. And it seems that the balance of power has really switched. The advantage that the Americans had at the very beginning, and now they've got they're trying to find targets. The balance of power has switched, and I believe now that the Iranians have the better leverage. And although the Arab states are still, like UAE and Saudi specifically, are still saying to the United States that they want to have this ended. They don't want to have Iran as a regional hegemon, sure, but they don't want a war either, because 30% of the region's production of oil has disappeared. That's 11 million barrels a day. They can't get it from Venezuela. There was an oil refinery fire in Texas or Louisiana yesterday or the day before. So refining capability has been reduced as well, and that was one of the refineries, I think, that did that heavy crude out of Venezuela. So this problem is being exacerbated. Now, where I sit here in Southeast Asia, all governments are downing commercial aircraft. They don't have enough fuel. All flights in Myanmar, for example, have been cancelled. There are 0 flights now. One of my friends was in there and had to make a 12-hour emergency kind of car trip to get on a last flight. There are no more flights from Myanmar. Philippines has declared a national emergency. Cambodia, 400 gas stations have been closed. I think a couple have now received some fuel, but Cambodia imports all of its oil, despite my advice to them many years ago to change that situation in the days when I used to advise governments, and build more solar. And just as a little diversion here, the solar panel production that was being made in Cambodia to offset this problem and to create an export industry, was slammed shut when the Americans decided they weren't going to be importing solar panels that were connected as a secondary sanction to Chinese companies or Chinese production or whatever, despite the fact that almost all of it was being built in Cambodia. The suggestion was, just take that supply that now where you're going to export to, use that for your domestic production and put it into place as quickly as possible, and you're going to offset, the largest external spending that the government has. And so I think, this situation is now global. Every single country, and there have been statements from the EU, there have been statements from all sorts of countries saying that they are going to start ramping up their renewables. I think Keir Starmer has mentioned that it has to be renewables. Germany is going for more wind power. This is definitely the way forward. It was clearly the way forward a long time ago. This is going to boost EV sales. I think there's going to be a real boost on that. And same with electric bikes, all that, anything that's electric. But we have to remember that as long as electricity is produced by oil or gas, there is a secondary effect on the pricing of electricity as well. Now, so far that hasn't happened. I don't think electricity prices in Southeast Asia so far have not risen that high. I think that is also true, generally speaking, but there are exceptions. But it's not going to get better as long as the Straits of Hormuz are closed. But by trying to open it through military action is just going to exacerbate the problem. So regarding energy politics, we have to assume now that, because as I said, Susan Strange talks about markets dominating government, and it's clear that we are heading, if this continues for another week, and as I said, Trump's just done 10 days. Now he says it's not 5 days, now he says it's 10 days. Well, it's going to take them that long to move all of the vast armada they're sending, the Spanish armada, except it's Trump's armada, it's the Roosevelt armada, and that's going to take at least 10 days anyway to be positioned. So he's just trying to get more time, settle the markets again, get them all ready, and I read another report early this morning that said that he's thinking about sending 10,000 more troops. This is still not enough to conduct a ground war in Iran. And I will say this categorically. You cannot win a ground war in Asia with expeditionary forces whilst you have economic turmoil and problems with the supply of oil, energy of any kind, fertilizers, critical gases and minerals, helium and things like that, which are so important. Tungsten, all sorts of things. Now, interestingly, the only two countries that really can get through this, even if it gets worse, are going to be Russia and China. For everybody else, it's going to be extraordinarily difficult. I know, I'm not saying it won't be difficult for Russia and China, but they are best prepared, best placed to be able to withstand this. Russia, because of the situation with sanctions and so forth, they've insulated their economy almost completely at this stage. And for China, because it's got Russian energy and minerals and support, and this is going to help them enormously. Now, secondly, we've seen the Indians are sending a large fleet, but they have negotiated and their ships are able to go through. They're going to be escorted by Indian naval vessels. I don't know if there's a connection in here with the Quad, if there's any cooperation or collaboration or coordination between India through the Quad network, but they're definitely sending across the Indian Ocean. They're going to send, and they are sending a small fleet. I'm not sure how many vessels exactly, but they are doing that, and all of the Europeans have said they're going to do something similar, but at this point it looks like the UK's got one ship or something like that. I think it was The Economist interviewed a British fellow, I can't remember his name, and who spent a lot of time studying the Iraq and Afghanistan crises, and I believe he was actually a soldier there at one point. And this fellow was saying that yes, the British really only had one ship available in real terms. The French say they're going to continue to do that. Can the Germans? Possibly. The Australians are sending reconnaissance aircraft. Well, all of this is not really going to make much difference unless they can successfully the Americans can successfully get control of Hormuz. And as I said to you many times before in my previous podcasts, I don't believe they're going to be able to do this. The risks outweigh the benefits, and the best path forward is the path that's been suggested by China and by the Russians and by some others in Europe, Viktor Orban, for example, and others. Just saying that, look, this needs to be negotiated quickly, and the escalation needs to be stopped. And Trump, how to stop him? How to stop this man, who seems to be, the word delusional keeps appearing in articles everywhere now, TV interviews, the delusion of grandeur, the delusion of power, the delusion of empire. Now, just to give you a really good example, the USS Nimitz is supposed to be decommissioned this year, but now it's going to be extended for another year. They've signed the contracts for the decommissioning already, which was, I think, $55 million, but now it's going to be put back into action. So it's already in Panama, I believe, and it's leading, an armada, a fleet carrier group, Nimitz Fleet Carrier Group. And by the way, the Nimitz has been specialized in doing small boat interceptions. And so that's clearly what was done in Venezuela before the capture of Maduro. And we can see that they've done the same, they've followed the same game plan. When I say they, I mean the Americans have followed the same game plan as they had with Maduro. And that is they're sending a flotilla to sit off the coast of Colombia. Now they're doing this to Pedro in Colombia, the president of Colombia, who is not a fan of Trump. And when the Americans have said, they've made attacks in the Eastern Pacific, what they mean is Colombia. And now this Nimitz carrier group is going to be sitting off the coast of Colombia, possibly taking out small boats of some sort, totally illegal, in international waters. No process here, no due process, just kill. And it looks very much like they might be setting this up as a diversion, but also part of the Donroe doctrine to remove Pedro in Colombia. Now this seems to be happening. This is sort of relatively low key, but now Trump has said that they're going to send the Nimitz carrier group to circumnavigate South America. Now this reminds me of the Great White Fleet of Theodore Roosevelt, but they were all new ships, and they went off around the world. But the Nimitz carrier group they're not new at all. They're old, and this seems like this is a preparation for regime change in Colombia. That's what it's beginning to look like. And then, of course, there's Cuba, and the Americans trying to impose an oil embargo on Cuba. Whether or not those two Russian tankers get there to Cuba, I mean, can they be interdicted? Will the Americans try to stop them? I'm not sure. I'm not quite sure where those carriers are right now. I think they were redirected to one of the other islands in the Caribbean. It might have been Trinidad. But clearly, if the Nimitz is going to circumnavigate South America, well, is it going to first do the Colombia stop, make something happen there, depending on what goes on in Iran, and also, or Straits of Hormuz, and then also go around the bottom of South America and back up to Cuba? So the Nimitz is going to be sitting off Cuba 6 months from now, 3 months from now. This is all potentially possible, and I think the Iran thing is giving cover for that activity, and that's why they're keeping the Nimitz running. The Gerald Ford, that's the newest of the aircraft carriers, out of action at the moment, and it's probably going to be out of action for at least 6 weeks, I imagine, possibly longer. So they're stuck with what they have, and it's going to take another 10 days for the other ships that were in the Pacific, Indo-Pacific, to get to the region and wind up all the troops, get them all ready, get all their material, and that's been happening. We know that's been happening. There are lots of reports and even sightings, some videos floating around in YouTube and elsewhere of cargoes, military cargoes being transported inside the US to ports. All of this doesn't bode well. And then, of course, as I've said, another land war in Asia we know that's not going to fly. It's not going to happen. So what can they really do? And now the idea that they're going to take an island, Karg Island or any other island, and then use that as a terrestrial base to have specific special operations, military operations within Iran. Now that is possible. The first targets are going to be nuclear. But the Italian fellow Grossi, who runs the IAEA, gave an interview yesterday in which he said the only way to stop Iran's nuclear facilities is to use tactical nuclear weapons. Now that is something very, very strange coming out of that man's mouth. He has not been a balanced official. I mean, he has, and he's been accused widely by not just the Iranians, by others, of providing, feeding all the information into the CIA or White House. And of course the Iranians just are not going to have anything to do with him. That's not going to happen. And so now he's making these statements where he's saying to get rid of nuclear, we need nuclear. This is very, very dangerous from somebody who's head of the IAEA, because their job is about energy and nuclear controls and so forth, not to even suggest the idea that tactical nuclear weapons might be used. I mean, I did suggest this a couple of days ago. This is my greatest fear. I don't think that I think there's only about a 20% chance, but one must remember that only the Americans ever used nuclear weapons before, in real terms. Everybody's tested them that has them, but they've only been used twice, and that was by the Americans. And would they do it again with small tactical nuclear weapons is always potential. And the other thing that I also mentioned was that these troops that are being sent into the Middle East, I think they cannot run off these islands or off ships or out of bases in the region because they're just not going to be enough of them on the ground, and they won't be able to resupply. And I think 350,000 well-trained home turf Iranians are going to decimate whatever the Americans can put in like that. And no amount of air power is going to change that situation. The destruction of anything they need to destroy or want to destroy is going to have to be done from the air. Getting ground troops in on like a nuclear reactor or some sites where there's specifically the enriched uranium, getting hold of that those are potential targets for sure. But I have a feeling that actually these numbers and the power arrangement that the Americans are setting up looks a lot more useful if they were to think about the Houthis and in Yemen. Now the Israelis have a base in Somaliland now. They recognise Somaliland. They're the only country to do so, but because they're the US proxy, of course, all the US and allies, I'm not saying the allies are doing this or even thinking about it, but it's possible, but the US definitely and Israel are going to use the Somaliland as a base for attacking the Houthis. You would need paratroopers to get something on the ground to get rid of all their launches, and I think this is looking much more likely than actually using these troops to attack Iran. I'd say that you clean up. I mean, an intervention in Yemen looks more likely. This kind of force structure, I cannot see them successfully holding anything, and even getting that nuclear material, enriched uranium, is at this point I would say is highly unlikely. They might attempt it, but it would look terrible if American soldiers were killed on the ground, and Trump would be in all sorts of, if he's not already in deep hot water, that would be worse. The bit where you knock on the door and you ask, St. Peter in heaven, which door, whichever door you choose, it's all going to be bad. So I think that's the situation. And this situation is very much like the position in chess. Alexander Makuros on his the Duran, they've spoken about this, where whatever move Trump makes now is not actually going to alter his potential for winning per se. And as we know, over the last 4 weeks, they've won it already, apparently. And the only thing is that Iran has not admitted defeat. So is that what's needed here? Is that the American negotiating position? Admit defeat and then we'll call it off? I don't think so. I think the Israelis are now pathologically, Netanyahu is pathological about this. 40 years he's been waiting. He's not going to let this go if he can. And I suppose the Israeli lobby in America is going to support that situation. And then the Americans also, at some point, they need to get hold of global oil, energy. They see that as their only way to really reimpose dollar as a reserve currency. That position has been fading, as we discussed just a little bit earlier. So we need to get to the end of this today. It's fairly long for me, but I just want to say that the whole region, West Asia, has been set back 10 to 15 years on by this. And the idea that Iran is doing this randomly and wantonly and so forth, they have every right to defend themselves, no matter what. And if there's attacks coming from bases in other countries around them, well then they have every right to defend themselves, and that means to take out anything that can attack them, and that's what they're doing. And we can see that interception of missiles, they still have lots of missiles, and they haven't used all of their really high-end hypersonics yet. So I think there's a real problem going on here, and the Israelis have clamped down on their media. Censorship is total. They're not allowing anything to get out if they can help it, to show what's the destruction that's happening, who's been killed, or so forth and so on. And remember that Israel's a small place, there's not that many places you can hide in Israel. Now, Iran is very large. It's twice the size of the Ukraine. And it's got deserts, mountainous, heavily forested, all of that sort of thing, and the coastline near Hormuz is rocky and mountainous, as I've said before, and these missiles that they have and the drones that they have don't even have to be close to Hormuz. They can be hundreds of kilometers, 1,000 kilometers away, and they can still act to block Hormuz. And if they put mines in there, well then, that's game over. What? So then you have to get minesweepers in there. So then you have to absolutely get in on the ground to stop any kind of missiles being launched. I think this is just starting to look like a total nightmare, and every government in the world now must be communicating to the Americans that this is foolish. They are going to force a global recession if this keeps up. The American economy is nowhere near as strong as everybody seems to think, and nowhere near as strong as Trump is claiming. Capital flight, as I mentioned earlier, is starting to happen. The stock market volatility, there's bubbles there in AI. And we have to remember that, in the old days, you build a railway, it lasts 100 years. You build a highway, it lasts 50 years. You build the internet, it lasts for 30 years, fiber optic cables. But AI centers, they're good for 3 or 4. And the capital expenditure here is so enormous. And if the Iranians target AI centers, and there's a lot of AI centers in the Middle East because they had access to cheap energy and electricity, that could cause enormous havoc globally, socially, economically, politically, but it could be really disastrous for actually being able to run a war, which is dependent on all of these systems now. So if you knock out these centers and you cut cables, do things like that, it's going to become very old school, traditional kind of warfare. In that case, I think the Americans are even in a worse position. So, all in all, just to summarize at the end, this 10-day break, yes, the Americans are going to use it to reposition, redeploy, replan, etc., etc. But in the end, that 10 days needs to be used very, very, very carefully by all of the people who are advising the government of the United States to find a way out very quickly. And that needs to happen before any meeting in China. China has once again shown that it is the most stable. It has more diplomatic clout, and it is able to bring people to the table and build consensus much more than the Americans are going to be able to do. And at the end, they will be more resilient in terms of a financial crisis, a global recession, than the Americans and the Europeans, and of course Southeast Asia, where I am. I suppose that's the end of today. This is going out on ASEAN Chair. I will put a link below into the other podcasts on other channels. So the Chair on Substack, Global Polarity, and Small State Diplomacy, because this is a global problem. A delusional America, and looking at the midterms, probably a straight flat loss, unless even if they went and take Colombia and Cuba, Greenland or anywhere else. I think Trump is headed for a downfall. We'll talk to you again tomorrow. Thank you very much.